"You spend your last dollar," she said. "I have to bear you a child." He had never imagined life could come to such a point. Not in a million years. Sitting on the edge of a worn-out wooden chair in the dim light of his tiny apartment, he stared at the few coins left in his pocket. Every sound outside seemed to mock him, the laughter of children playing on the street, the distant hum of cars, the occasional bark of a dog. To anyone passing by, it was just another ordinary evening, but for him it felt like the world had quietly conspired to leave him behind. He reached into his pocket and counted the coins again, just to make sure. 1, 2, 3. That was it. His last 7 coins. He had spent his last dollar on a small loaf of bread and a bottle of water, hoping it would carry him through the next day. But now, staring at the empty kitchen counter and the nearly bare shelves, he felt the weight of reality pressing down on him like a stone. It hadn't always been this way. Just a few months ago, he had held dreams of building a better life. He had ambitions that kept him awake at night, thinking of ways to improve, to succeed. But life had a quiet way of breaking even the strongest resolve. A series of small misfortunes had piled up, each one harder to overcome than the last. A job lost, a friend who turned away, bills that never stopped arriving. Each disappointment seemed small alone, but together they created a mountain he could not climb. He looked around the apartment. The walls were bare, except for a single faded photograph of him and someone he once thought would be with him forever. He smiled faintly at the memory. They had laughed in that photograph, arms around each other, looking like nothing could ever go wrong, and yet here he was, alone, facing the harsh silence of reality. Hunger gnawed at him, but it wasn't the physical hunger that hurt the most. It was the hunger for hope, for direction, for a sign that tomorrow could be better. He ran his hand through his hair, feeling the stress and fatigue etched into every strand. He remembered the excitement he had felt when he first moved into this small apartment, thinking it was a step toward independence and freedom. That excitement had faded quickly, replaced by the constant worry about money, survival, and what the future held. As he sat there, lost in thought, he realized he had a choice. He could give up, let the despair swallow him whole, or he could try to keep moving forward, even if it meant taking one small, uncertain step at a time. But making that choice wasn't simple. Fear whispered in his ear, telling him he wasn't strong enough, that he wasn't capable, that the world didn't care about him. Doubt and anxiety settled in his chest like a heavy stone, and he struggled to breathe under their weight. He thought about the people who had once counted on him, or whom he had once counted on. Friends who had disappeared when life became hard, family members who couldn't help because they had their own battles. And then there was her. She had been there, in the quiet moments, in the laughter and the arguments, in the days filled with nothing but dreams and ordinary routines. He remembered the way she used to smile at him, the way her hand felt in his, the way she believed in him even when he could not believe in himself. That thought brought a mix of warmth and pain. She had always been different, steady, determined, and willing to face life head-on. While he sometimes stumbled under the weight of problems, she seemed to carry her own challenges with grace and strength. And yet, even she could not erase the fact that he was standing at the edge of desperation, his last dollar spent, with no clear path forward. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine a better future. He pictured himself working a steady job, having enough money to pay the bills, and maybe even saving a little for the unexpected. He imagined the simple joys, sitting at a cafe with her, walking in the park, laughing without the constant worry of survival pressing down on them. But each image felt fragile, as if it could shatter the moment he opened his eyes and returned to reality. Then came the silence, the quiet that followed the day's struggles, when the world seemed to pause and let him feel every bit of his loneliness and fear. In that silence, he realized he had nothing left but the choices he could still make. He could despair, or he could find a way to face the challenges, no matter how small that way might be. He could try to survive, to live, and perhaps even to thrive one day. But first, he had to take the first step, even if it was uncertain and shaky. The thought made his chest tighten. How could he move forward when the very next step was unknown? How could he plan for tomorrow when he could barely afford today? And yet, there was a spark, a tiny flicker of determination deep inside him. It wasn't bright, and it wasn't strong, but it was there. And for the first time in days, he felt something that wasn't fear. It was possibility. As he sat there, the evening shadows stretching across the floor, he realized that life had brought him to a moment of reckoning. He could no longer rely on luck, on chance, or on anyone else. The path ahead was his alone to walk, and he had to find a way, even if the steps were slow and painful. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but it also gave him a strange sense of focus. For the first time in weeks, he felt the possibility of action, the chance to reclaim something, even if it was only a small piece of control. He opened his eyes and looked around again. The apartment was small and bare, but it was his. The coins in his pocket were few, but they represented a chance, however tiny, to keep going. He remembered the words he had once heard from someone wiser than himself. "Even the smallest step forward is better than standing still." He repeated them silently, as if saying them out loud would make them real. And then, unexpectedly, a thought crossed his mind. A thought that made his heart beat faster. A thought that brought both fear and hope together in one strange mix. It was her. He thought of her strength, her quiet determination, and the way she had always faced life head-on. He wondered if she knew, really knew, how close he was to the edge, and if she would still stand by him when there was nothing left to give. The idea was almost too much to bear. He feared rejection, abandonment, and judgment. And yet, he felt drawn to the possibility that she might offer something he hadn't expected, a chance, not just for survival, but for life, love, and connection. He didn't know what form it would take, and he couldn't predict the consequences. But the thought made him realize that even in his lowest moment, there were people who mattered, who could make the impossible seem possible. As the night deepened and the world outside his window grew quiet, he made a decision. He would face tomorrow, no matter how uncertain, no matter how difficult. He would find a way to survive, to live, and to hold on to the possibility of hope. And though he did not yet know what awaited him, he felt the faint, thrilling possibility that life could change in ways he had never imagined. He took a deep breath and rose from the chair. His body was tired, his mind weary, but something inside him refused to break. He would take the first step, and then the next, and then another. And in that quiet moment, as he stared at the fading light of evening, he realized that even when everything seemed lost, life could still surprise him. And sometimes, the most unexpected moments, like the words that would soon change everything, were waiting just around the corner. He didn't know how long he had been sitting in silence when he heard her voice. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calm but firm, the kind of calm that made you realize someone was serious. "I have to bear you a child," she said. The words hit him like an unexpected storm. He blinked, unable to speak for a few moments, as if his brain refused to accept what he had just heard. At first, he thought he must have misheard her. His mind raced. How could she say such a thing now when he had nothing to give, when they were both barely surviving? He wanted to question her, to argue, to say it was impossible, but deep inside he also knew she was speaking the truth. He looked at him with steady eyes, unafraid of his reaction, unshaken by the uncertainty of their situation. Her gaze carried a quiet strength that made him realize she had already made up her mind. She wasn't asking for permission, she wasn't trying to convince him. She was simply stating a fact, a choice she had made, a path she was determined to follow. His mind flashed back to the countless moments they had shared, the laughter, the arguments, the small routines of everyday life that had once felt so ordinary but now seemed extraordinary. He remembered how she had always believed in him, even when he had stopped believing in himself. How she had encouraged him when he was afraid to take risks, and how she had comforted him when the world felt cold and cruel. And now, in this small apartment filled with shadows and worry, she was asking him to trust her once again. To believe in her strength and in the possibility that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her words were more than a declaration. They were a test of faith, not in him, but in life itself. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but his throat felt tight. Fear, disbelief, and a strange mix of hope battled inside him. He thought about the bills that were overdue, the empty fridge, the instability that surrounded them both. He thought about what it meant to bring a child into a world where survival itself was uncertain. He worried about failing, about not being able to provide, about the weight of responsibility crushing them all. Yet, even as fear gripped him, he couldn't ignore the determination in her eyes. It was the same determination that had carried her through her own struggles, the kind that refused to bow to circumstance. She had faced hardship before, and she had come through stronger each time. And now, she was offering him a chance to rise again, to be more than he had been in recent months, to face life with purpose instead of despair. He sank back into the chair, feeling the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. He wanted to shout, to cry, to run, but none of those responses seemed right. He realized that this was not a moment to flee, but a moment to face the truth of their situation, however frightening it was. The fear in his heart was real, but so was the spark of possibility she had ignited. She stepped closer, her presence filling the small room. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and strength. "I know it's not easy," she said softly, "but sometimes life gives us a chance to do something meaningful, even when everything seems lost." He thought about the choices he had made, the mistakes, the missteps, the moments when he had given up hope, and he thought about the chance she was offering, an opportunity to rebuild, to create something beautiful, something lasting, even in the midst of hardship. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond survival. He imagined the tiny life that might grow between them, a child who would bring light into the darkness, hope into despair. He imagined moments filled with laughter, small victories, and the kind of love that could endure even the harshest storms. But reality remained stubborn. He knew that dreams alone could not pay the bills, that hope alone could not fill an empty stomach, and that love alone could not shield them from the struggles that life would inevitably bring. He had to find a way to make it work, to face the practical challenges that lay ahead, and that realization made his chest tighten once more. She seemed to sense his inner turmoil and gave him time to think. She didn't push, didn't demand an immediate answer. Instead, she simply waited, offering a quiet strength that made him realize she had already accepted whatever challenges would come. Her calm presence reminded him that they were not alone in this fight, that together they could face even the most daunting obstacles. Hours passed as they sat together, the silence filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. He thought about the future, about the uncertainty, and about the responsibility that was now being placed before him. And slowly, as the initial shock faded, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of determination. He realized that she wasn't just asking him to accept a child. She was asking him to accept life itself, to face it fully and courageously, to rise above fear and uncertainty. And in that moment, he understood that this choice, as difficult as it was, offered them both a chance to find purpose, to grow stronger, and to experience a kind of love that went beyond convenience or comfort. He took a deep breath and looked into her eyes, seeing the unwavering trust and hope reflected there. It was a moment that demanded courage, honesty, and commitment. And though his heart raced with fear, he felt a glimmer of resolve take hold. He realized that life might never be easy, that challenges would continue to come, but that together they could face them. Her hand tightened gently on his shoulder, a silent gesture of encouragement. And for the first time he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "If we do this, we do it together," he said. She nodded, a small smile breaking through the tension. "Together," she repeated. The night grew deeper, but neither of them moved. They sat side by side, feeling the weight of what had just been said, knowing that their lives were about to change in ways they could not yet imagine. The small apartment, once a place of despair, now held the possibility of new beginnings, fragile but real. As he thought about the future, He realized that this was not just about surviving anymore. It was about building, about creating something meaningful in the face of adversity. It was about hope, love, and the courage to embrace life, even when circumstances were far from ideal. And though fear still lingered, it no longer felt paralyzing. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. The words she had spoken, simple yet profound, had opened a door he hadn't known existed. A door that led to possibilities, to challenges worth facing, and to a life that, though uncertain, could be full of meaning. He knew that the days ahead would not be easy. There would be struggles, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that they would face them together, supported by trust, love, and determination. And in that knowledge, he found a quiet strength he had almost forgotten he possessed. The night passed slowly, filled with reflection and whispered conversations. And when the first light of dawn crept through the window, he felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by courage, hope, and the determination to move forward.
He realized that this moment, terrifying as it was, had the power to change everything.
It was the beginning of a journey neither of them could predict, but one that offered the chance to transform their lives in ways they had never imagined. And though the road ahead would be difficult, he felt ready to take the first step. Together. Even after her words had settled in the room, even after the quiet promise of together lingered in the air, his mind refused to rest. Fear had a way of sneaking back in, whispering doubts he could not ignore. He sat alone on the worn wooden chair, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could they bring a child into the world when they barely had enough to live on? He thought about the small apartment, the empty fridge, the bills piled high in the corner. Each problem pressed against him like an invisible weight, and he struggled to see a path forward. She had chosen this course with determination, but he felt unprepared, like a man asked to climb a mountain without shoes. Doubt gnawed at him. He remembered his failures, the moments he had given up before, the times he had let himself be overwhelmed by circumstance. Could he really be someone who could handle this? Could he be someone she could trust with this enormous responsibility? He clenched his fists, frustration and fear mixing in a storm that made his chest ache. He tried to picture the future, the child, the little life that would depend on them both. His imagination wavered between joy and terror. He imagined late nights, crying, sleepless hours, constant worry, and the endless responsibility that parenthood would bring. The thought was almost paralyzing. Could he rise to that challenge? Could he provide love, care, and stability when he had so little to give himself? And then he thought about her. She had always been steady, reliable, strong in ways he had admired, but never fully understood. She had faced hardships with courage and grace, never complaining, never giving up. She had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. And now she was asking him to trust her, to walk into a life-altering journey together. Her faith in him was both inspiring and terrifying. His mind replayed their conversations, their small moments of shared laughter, and even the arguments that seemed meaningless at the time. He remembered how she had spoken about hope, about fighting for what mattered, about not giving up on dreams even when the odds were stacked against them. That memory gave him a small spark of courage, but the fear remained stubborn. He worried about the practical challenges. How would they afford even the simplest necessities for a child? What if he failed to provide? What if he made mistakes that could hurt the very life he wanted to protect? These thoughts kept him awake at night, cycling endlessly like a wheel that refused to stop turning. Friends' words echoed in his mind, well-meaning but harsh reminders of reality. "You can't handle it," they had said. "Think carefully before taking on something so big." Even the voices of strangers, passing judgment and passing conversation, seemed to haunt him. It felt like the world was full of doubt, and somehow all that doubt was his responsibility to overcome. He knew he couldn't let fear make the decisions for him. He had to think clearly, weigh the options, and confront the reality of what they were choosing. But clarity was hard to come by when emotions were tangled with responsibility, love, and worry. Every practical thought seemed to collide with a deeper emotional truth. He cared for her. He cared about the life they might bring into the world, and he wanted to rise to the occasion, even if he felt unworthy. The next morning he woke with a sense of heavy responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He saw her preparing breakfast, moving quietly, deliberately, in the small kitchen. She didn't speak of their situation, didn't try to convince him or sway him. She simply lived, simply existed, and let her determination speak for itself. Her quiet strength was a mirror, reflecting the man he could become if he chose to rise to the occasion. Still, doubts crept in. He worried that he might fail her, that he might fail the child, that he might fail himself. He imagined scenarios where life became unbearable, where struggles outweighed joy, where mistakes multiplied into regrets. The weight of these possibilities made him want to retreat, to hide from responsibility, to escape. But he knew that running away would only guarantee failure. He began to speak to himself aloud, trying to organize his thoughts, to calm the storm of fear in his heart. "We can figure this out," he whispered. "One step at a time. We will face it together." The words felt fragile, almost hollow, but repeating them gave him a small measure of strength. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. Over the next few days, he began to confront reality in small, deliberate steps. He looked for ways to earn even a little money, to prepare their apartment for the possibility of a child, to find solutions to the problems that had seemed insurmountable before. Each small action was a victory, however minor, a reminder that he could contribute, that he could take responsibility, that he could rise above despair. She noticed his efforts and offered quiet encouragement. She didn't pressure him, didn't scold him for hesitation or doubt. Instead, she acknowledged every small step, every attempt to face reality, and every effort to take responsibility. Her support became a lifeline, a reminder that they were not alone in facing the challenges ahead. Despite his growing determination, fear never fully disappeared. Some nights, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the worst-case scenarios. He worried about sickness, accidents, financial crises, and mistakes he might make. Each possibility seemed more terrifying than the last. And yet, even in those moments, he felt a stubborn resolve building inside him, a refusal to give in to despair. He began to realize that life was not about avoiding challenges or eliminating fear. Life was about facing what came, about learning to navigate uncertainty, and about finding courage when circumstances seemed impossible. Each day, each choice, each small action was a step toward growth, toward responsibility, toward a future that was still uncertain but filled with possibility. He also began to notice the depth of her courage. She had made a choice that most people would fear to make, a choice that demanded sacrifice, resilience, and strength. She had accepted the risk of the unknown, the weight of responsibility, and the challenges that lay ahead. Watching her face life so boldly inspired him, challenged him, and reminded him of the potential he had within himself. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet apartment, he realized something profound. The fears that had seemed so overwhelming were not obstacles meant to stop him. They were tests, challenges to be faced with courage, patience, and love. And the woman beside him, the one who had chosen this path with determination, was not just a partner in this journey. She was a guide, a source of strength, and a reminder that life could be faced even in its most difficult moments. He understood that this journey would not be easy. There would be sleepless nights, financial struggles, moments of doubt, and decisions that seemed impossible. But he also understood that together they could endure, learn, and grow. They could create a life filled with meaning, joy, and hope, even in the midst of uncertainty. Slowly, he felt a shift inside himself. Fear still lingered, but it was accompanied by courage. Doubt still arose, but it was tempered by determination. And hope, fragile but real, began to bloom in the spaces where despair had once lived. He realized that life would always hold uncertainty, but that uncertainty was not a reason to stop living. It was a reason to embrace every moment, to face challenges, and to grow stronger in the process. He reached for her hand, feeling the quiet warmth and strength she offered. In that simple touch, he found reassurance, connection, and a reminder of the life they were building together. Words were not necessary. The gesture spoke of trust, commitment, and a shared determination to face whatever lay ahead. And in that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. He would not give up. He would face the challenges, embrace responsibility, and rise to the occasion no matter how difficult it might be. Fear might linger, and doubt might return, but courage, hope, and love would guide him forward. The days continued, filled with small victories and occasional setbacks. Each step forward was a lesson, each challenge an opportunity to grow. He learned patience, perseverance, and the importance of taking responsibility even when the future seemed uncertain. And through it all, the presence of the woman who had chosen this path with him reminded him that strength was found not in solitude, but in partnership, trust, and shared purpose. By the time the first weeks passed, he felt a quiet transformation within himself. He was no longer the man paralyzed by fear. He was someone who could face uncertainty, make choices, and take responsibility for the life he was creating. He realized that courage was not a sudden dramatic moment, but a series of small decisions, made consistently day after day. And as he looked at her, seeing the determination, hope, and love reflected in her eyes, he understood the truth that had begun to take root in his heart. Life would never be without challenges, but with courage, responsibility, and partnership, they could face anything. They could survive, endure, and even thrive, one step at a time, building a life full of meaning, hope, and love. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to shift in ways he hadn't imagined. The fear and doubt that had consumed him were still there, like shadows that linger even when the sun rises, but they were no longer in control. He found himself taking small, deliberate actions each day, each one a step toward a life he once thought impossible. He started looking for work, anything that could bring in even a little income. At first, it was discouraging. Jobs seemed scarce, and the few opportunities that appeared were either low-paying or required skills he did not fully possess. Rejection after rejection hit him like waves, threatening to pull him back into despair. Yet each morning he woke with a renewed determination. He remembered her words, her calm strength, and the promise they had made to face life together. That promise became a shield against fear. He also began to organize their small apartment. Where there had once been disorder and empty shelves, he started to make space for what might come. He cleaned, fixed broken furniture, and found ways to stretch their resources. He realized that even small changes could bring order to their lives, a sense of control in a world that had often felt uncontrollable. Each small improvement felt like a victory, a reminder that progress was possible, even in difficult circumstances. She noticed his efforts, and her quiet encouragement made a difference he couldn't fully describe. She didn't demand perfection or expect him to act heroically. She simply acknowledged his steps, no matter how small, and offered her own strength in return. Together, they became a team, each relying on the other in ways neither had anticipated. Her support reminded him that he was not alone, that together they could face challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. One day, he found a temporary job at a small shop in their neighborhood. It didn't pay much and the hours were long, but it was enough to bring in a little money. The work was exhausting, physically and mentally, but he approached it with a determination he had not known he possessed. Each day as he returned home tired but satisfied, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. For the first time in months he realized that he could contribute, that he could provide, even if only in small ways. She celebrated these victories with him, not with grand gestures, but with smiles, quiet words of encouragement, and small acts of care. She cooked meals when she could, helped him organize his schedule, and reminded him to rest when he needed it. Her presence was a constant source of strength, a reminder that life was no longer something to face alone. Together, they began to build routines, small rituals that brought stability to their days. Even as progress was made, challenges continued to appear. Unexpected expenses, long hours at work, and the constant worry about the future tested their resolve. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, when he questioned whether they could truly handle the responsibility of bringing a child into their lives. But in those moments he found that he could lean on her, that her calm determination provided guidance and reassurance. She had chosen this path, and she showed him that commitment was not just about courage, but about consistency, patience, and resilience. Slowly, he began to see the possibilities in life rather than just the obstacles. He learned to focus on what could be done today, rather than worrying about all the uncertainties of tomorrow. He realized that progress was not measured by grand achievements but by the steady accumulation of small steps, each one bringing them closer to a stable, meaningful life. One evening, after a long day at work, he returned home to find her waiting with a simple meal on the table. They ate together in silence, the comfort of their routine offering a sense of normalcy in a world that had often felt chaotic. As he watched her, he realized how much they had grown together, how much trust and understanding had developed between them. Her strength had inspired him to rise above his own fears, and his efforts had reminded her that they could face life as a team. The weeks passed, and with them came small, unexpected joys. A neighbor offered extra vegetables from their garden. A friend gave advice on budgeting, and even small successes at work brought a sense of pride and confidence. These moments, simple and often overlooked by others, became milestones in their journey. Each small victory was a reminder that life was not only about struggle, but also about resilience, hope, and the capacity to find light in darkness. He also began to prepare emotionally for the child they hoped to bring into the world. He read books, asked questions, and tried to understand what it would mean to be a parent. At first, it felt overwhelming. The responsibilities seemed too great, the challenges too many. But as he continued to learn and prepare, he discovered a growing sense of readiness, a deepening connection to the life that might soon depend on him. She watched his transformation with quiet pride. She knew he had struggled, that fear had held him back, and that doubt had clouded his confidence. But now she saw a man who had risen to the challenge, who had faced his fears, and who was beginning to embrace responsibility with courage and determination. Together, they had created a foundation of trust, love, and mutual support that would carry them forward. Despite progress, life was not without setbacks. There were days when the apartment felt too small, when money ran low, or when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. But each challenge became an opportunity to grow, to find creative solutions, and to strengthen their bond. They learned to communicate more openly, to share responsibilities, and to support one another in practical ways. With each obstacle overcome, they became more confident in their ability to face the future together. He also began to notice a change within himself. The fear and hesitation that had once dominated his thoughts were gradually replaced by determination and resilience. He learned to trust himself, to take initiative, and to act even when the outcome was uncertain. He discovered a quiet strength he hadn't known he possessed, a strength born not of circumstance but of choice, effort, and perseverance. The child they hoped for became more than just a distant possibility. It became a source of motivation, a symbol of hope, and a reminder of the future they were building together. Each decision, each action, was now influenced by the thought of the life that might soon depend on them. And in that thought he found both responsibility and inspiration, a sense of purpose that guided his steps each day. She remained a constant source of encouragement, support, and guidance. Her strength was not loud or dramatic but steady and unwavering. She reminded him that life was about persistence, about small victories, and about facing challenges with courage and patience. Her presence was a reminder that they were not alone, that together they could overcome difficulties, and that the journey they were on was worth every struggle. As time passed, he began to realize that their life was slowly transforming. The fear that had once dominated his days was still present, but it no longer controlled him. Doubt still arose, but it was tempered by confidence and experience. And hope, fragile but persistent, had taken root in their lives, guiding their actions and inspiring them to face each day with courage. He also began to understand the meaning of partnership in a deeper way. It was not just about love or affection, but about shared responsibility, mutual support, and trust. It was about facing life's uncertainties together, learning from each challenge, and celebrating each small success. And in that understanding, he found a sense of fulfillment and connection that made the struggles worthwhile. One morning, as they sat together drinking tea, he realized how far they had come. The apartment was tidier, their routines more organized, and their hearts more prepared for the challenges ahead. He thought about the child they hoped to bring into the world and felt a growing sense of readiness and responsibility. The journey had been difficult, but it had also brought growth, strength, and a deeper understanding of life's possibilities. He reached for her hand, and she smiled, her eyes reflecting the quiet satisfaction of shared accomplishment. They had faced fear, doubt, and uncertainty, had begun to create a life built on trust, courage, and determination. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time he felt confident that they could navigate it together, step by step, facing whatever challenges came their way. And in that moment, he understood a truth he had only begun to glimpse. Life was not about avoiding difficulty, but about facing it with courage, hope, and resilience. It was about taking responsibility, supporting one another, and finding meaning in even the smallest actions. And as he looked at her, he realized that together they could not only survive but thrive, creating a life full of love, hope, and possibility. The months passed slowly, each one bringing its own mix of challenges, lessons, and small triumphs. The apartment that had once felt like a prison of worry and fear now carried a quiet warmth. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a space shaped by effort, love, and the shared determination to face life together. The changes were small at first. A little more organization, a few new routines, better meals, and the beginnings of saving even a tiny bit of money. But over time, these small steps built something far greater than either of them had imagined. He had changed too. The man who had once sat paralyzed by doubt and fear had grown into someone who could act even when the path ahead was uncertain. He had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Each day he faced small obstacles, long work hours, unexpected expenses, moments of worry, and met them with a resolve that had been absent from his life before. And through it all, she had been beside him, offering quiet guidance, encouragement, and unwavering faith. They talked often about the future, the child they hoped to welcome, the life they wanted to build, the kind of home they wanted to create. These conversations were never about perfection or wealth. They were about love, responsibility, and intention. He realized that preparing for a child wasn't about having everything figured out, but about being willing to learn, adapt, and grow together. It was about creating a foundation that was strong enough to carry them through challenges and flexible enough to embrace joy. One evening, as they sat together in the fading light, she rested her hand on her stomach and he felt a surge of emotions he could hardly name. Fear was still there, of course, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it had been joined by excitement, wonder, and a deep sense of purpose. They were about to bring new life into the world, a responsibility greater than any they had faced, but also a gift beyond measure.
He thought back to the night she had first told him her decision.
At the time, he had been filled with panic, doubt, and disbelief. Now, months later, he realized how that moment had set the course for everything that followed. It had forced him to confront his fears, to take responsibility, and to grow in ways he had never imagined. And though the journey had been hard, it had also revealed a strength and resilience he hadn't known he possessed. Their daily routines became rituals of care, love, and preparation. He would wake early to finish chores or complete small tasks before heading to work. She would prepare meals and organize their home while also tending to her health and planning for the future. They shared responsibilities naturally, learning to support one another, to communicate openly, and to navigate disagreements with patience and understanding. Every small decision became an opportunity to strengthen their partnership and prepare for the life that was coming. Despite all the progress, challenges still arose. There were days when money ran tight, when exhaustion made tasks feel impossible, and when worry crept into their minds. But they had learned to face these moments together. They leaned on each other, shared their burdens, and found creative solutions to problems that once would have felt overwhelming. Through each challenge, they discovered that resilience was not built in easy moments, but in the act of persevering when life seemed unfair. He also began to imagine the life they would share with their child. He pictured tiny hands, laughter echoing through the apartment, first steps and first words. He imagined teaching, guiding, and learning alongside a small human being who would carry a piece of both of them into the world. The thought filled him with both awe and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like he was working towards something larger than himself, something meaningful beyond the daily struggle to survive. She encouraged him in subtle ways, reminding him that growth was gradual and that progress was made one day at a time. She celebrated his efforts even when they were small, and offered support when he felt overwhelmed. Her belief in him never wavered, and he began to internalize that belief, recognizing his own capacity for love, responsibility, and resilience. Together, they became stronger than they had been individually. They also began to reach out to others, seeking advice from family, friends, and neighbors who had experience with raising children. Each conversation brought new insights and practical tips, helping them prepare not just emotionally but logistically as well. They learned about budgeting, nutrition, childcare, and the importance of creating a stable and loving environment. These lessons, combined with their own determination, built a sense of confidence that had seemed impossible in the early days of uncertainty. One afternoon, as he returned from work, he found her sitting at the small kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. She had been writing down plans, ideas, and goals, everything from preparing the nursery to creating a savings plan. He smiled, feeling both pride and gratitude. She had transformed their shared uncertainty into action, and her careful planning inspired him to continue doing his part. Together, they made small changes in their lives that added up over time. They created a schedule that balanced work, rest, and preparation. They learned to cook nutritious meals on a tight budget. They organized their home so it would be safe and welcoming for a child. They practiced patience, communication, and problem-solving in ways they had never needed before. Each small improvement built confidence and strengthened their partnership, creating a sense of stability and readiness that had once seemed impossible. He also took time to reflect on his personal growth. He realized how far he had come, from a man paralyzed by fear and doubt to someone capable of action, responsibility, and resilience. He understood that growth was not linear, and that there would always be moments of uncertainty, but he had learned the skills, mindset, and courage to face them. The lessons he had learned over the past months became part of his character, shaping him into a partner and future parent who could meet challenges with determination and grace. As the day of their child's arrival drew closer, their lives were filled with a mixture of anticipation, nervousness, and excitement. They spent evenings preparing the nursery, discussing names, and imagining the small joys of parenting. Each decision, each conversation, and each action was infused with love and care. They had learned to trust each other, to communicate openly, and to share responsibility in a way that gave both of them confidence and reassurance. Finally, the day came when they knew their lives would change forever. The months of preparation, the small victories, and the countless lessons had brought them to this point. They were ready, not perfectly, but as ready as anyone could be to face the incredible responsibility and joy of raising a child, and in that readiness, they found peace. As they held their child for the first time, everything that had once felt overwhelming, the fear, the doubt, the struggle, faded into the background. In its place was a profound sense of love, purpose, and connection. The child, small and fragile, represented hope, resilience, and the future they had worked so hard to create together. In that moment, they understood the meaning of their journey. Life was not about avoiding difficulty, but about facing it with courage, love, and determination. He looked at her and saw the strength, patience, and love that had carried them through so many challenges. And in her eyes he saw the reflection of his own growth, the man he had become through struggle, determination, and shared commitment. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship, and had emerged stronger, united, and ready to embrace the life they had chosen together. The months and years that followed were not without challenges, but they had learned to meet each one with courage, resilience, and love. They celebrated small victories, navigated difficulties, and created a life that, while imperfect, was filled with meaning and joy. The child became the center of their world, a constant reminder of the strength they had discovered within themselves and in each other. And as they looked back on the journey that had brought them to this point, they realized that the hardest moments, the fear, the doubt, the struggle, had been the moments that shaped them the most. Those moments had forced growth, revealed strength, and deepened their bond in ways that nothing else could have. They had faced life at its most uncertain and emerged not only surviving but thriving, with hope, love, and a sense of purpose that would guide them for years to come.